Right, start again. Good evening and welcome to this evening's Audit and Standards Committee for Rotherham District Council. In addition to welcoming members, I welcome numerous members of staff from our external auditors, Grant Thornton, and also to Bob Brown and Rose Durban, our independent members for standards, and to Patrick Farmer, our independent member for audit, and also Wendy Mears, who's here representing the parish councils. Right, agenda item 1, minutes of the last meeting. Do I have your authority to sign these as a correct record? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Item 2, apologies.
Councillor Kirby-Green.
Thank you. And additional agenda items. There is one additional agenda item tonight. We've called it 21, but it will be tabled in between items 6 and 7. It's the statement of accounts. Our new Section 151 officer, Mr. Ellis, was not content with 189 pages in our agenda and added another 94 for us to read. So thank you for that, Mr. Ellis. So I'll take that in between 6 and 7. Item 4, disclosures of interest. Councillor Thomas.
District Housing Company and also Bexhill Town Council.
Thank you. Yes, I'll also declare a member of Bexhill Town Council. Councillor Cortell.
I also need to declare my directorship of the Rotherham District Council Housing Company.
Thank you. And Councillor Langland's the same. Got a full house of the housing company. Right, on to Part A, the standards reports, and item 5, which is the proposed Code of Conduct. And Lorna Ford, our Deputy Chief Executive, will introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall back in December that it was agreed that we convene a small working group to consider and review again the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct with a view to recommending it for formal adoption for next council year. We did meet, that working group. We met last Friday, and that was Councillor Barnes, Cortell and Thomas. And I'm pleased to say we had a very constructive meeting, and from that meeting we felt that we should adopt the new code. The main reason for thinking that really was because from an officer point of view, the guidance is very clear and very clear to read and interpret, probably more so than our existing code of conduct. And also because it's been produced by the LGA, there's some excellent training material. We've already started to use the slides from that package of training for training with parish and town councils, and we found it very easy to use and interpret, and it's had very good feedback. The original, when this was last considered, it was felt that actually we should stay in line with the rest of East Sussex. And we felt that actually, you know, that was the best course of action at that time. But having sort of used the model code and sort of having to refer to it with some of our, actually, I think it's just Bexhill Town Council actually at the moment that's adopted the model code. We realised that actually this is something we felt was important to have consistency rather than across East Kent. It was more important to have consistency with our town and parish councils. So having considered the code, the working group felt that we should adopt it. So that's what the recommendation to full council says. The model code can be found in Appendix 1. We didn't put everything in the code, and it was felt that some of the flow charts and some of the diagrams that are contained within the model code should also come forward into our code of conduct when it's adopted. So that's the recommendation. The only other thing we considered as a committee was there was a question about the increase. Should we increase the value of gifts that should be registered from £25 to £50? And it was felt that we should keep that at £25. I think that's correct. The only other discussion we had that I think is worth feeding back is around our communication strategy. We had quite a long discussion on social media. We'd had a briefing last week that had been very pertinent, I think, to the discussion we had. And it was felt that outside of the Code of Conduct, we should also consider, when we're looking at our communication strategy, we should also consider adopting or revising our social media policy. And we felt that that was the place to do it. We have, of course, already included the wording for social media in our existing code. So I think that's it, really. So the committee is asked to recommend to Council that we do indeed adopt the LGA's model code, and that will be adopted in the new civic year.
Thank you. Just before I open it up to questions, can you just clarify for accuracy whether it was Councillor John Barnes or Councillor Mrs Mary Barnes?
It was Councillor Mrs Mary Barnes.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Any questions for Lorna? No, I would say my thing, having had to refer to one of the flow charts that's in the original Code of Conduct, I would say yes, please include them. Because although I didn't like the end result, it was easy to follow. Right, so the recommendation is that the proposed draft of conduct be approved and adopted. Councillor Mover, a second of that, please. Councillor Thomas and Councillor Cortell, thank you. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? No, that was unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to hear me say a few words.
We're happy to come and we support everything that Lorna said, so it was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got off lightly tonight.
I'll send you a food parcel back there.
Thank you. I'm sure Mr Farmer now wishes he was standards and not audit. Yes. No. Yes. Right, thank you. So we're now going on to part B, the audit reports. Item 6 is the report of the External Auditor's Audit Findings Report 21-2022, and that's going to be presented by Raymond. Is it Deganio, Raymond?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take the report as read, then we'll just go through some of the key elements of our report, which starts on page 21 of the report pack. Our materiality remains consistent at 2% of the gross expenditure, 75% of which is performance materiality, and any audit misstatements above our triviality threshold of 59 grand is reported within our report. The significant risks on our findings report are consistent with what we reported in our audit plan back in June last year. That includes risk on first management override of controls, where we reported no findings other than the control recommendations included on Appendix A or page 41 of the report pack. Next, valuation of pension fund net liability, where we noted an uncorrected misstatement of 374 grand overstatement on the pension liability. Third, presumption of fraud on expenditures is specifically on manual accruals, where we reported no issues. And finally, valuation of land and buildings and investment property. On page 29 of the report pack, we said that we are currently reviewing and challenging the valuation for 2 asset valuations. We are still in discussion with the management for the remaining information we need to be able to conclude on this area. So now on our control findings, which are set out on Appendix A, we have received management's responses on these recommendations, and as usual, we will report progress on this on our audit planning report on the next financial audit. The priority recommendation in relation to sensitivity analysis of particular estimate has been resolved in this year's audit 21-22. And as at the moment, the corrected audit misstatements set out on Appendix C or page 45 of our report, of the report pack, mainly affected disclosures of the statement of accounts. And on the other hand, the uncorrected misstatements, that includes the pension and error on the valuation of land and buildings are cumulatively below our performance materiality. Subject to the completion of the valuation work and receipt of the representation letter and the final review of the statement of accounts, we anticipate issuing an unqualified audit report. And now, before I hand this over to Amber to talk through us the outcome of the value for money work, does anyone have any questions on the audit findings report?
Yes, Councillor Cortell.
A couple of relatively small points that you raised in the report. One of them was about the costing of elections, and employees of Rother who help in elections, I understand, haven't got their costs, an element of their costs attributed to that. And I think you were vaguely recommending that that should happen. And there might have been a technical problem in achieving that. I tend to feel that elections should be properly costed, and therefore that should be resolved.
Yes, I think that particular recommendation is specific to 21-22 audit. So from speaking to the management, I think it's not really concerning in a way. I mean, it's mostly about how they classify specific transactions within their payroll register. So if it relates to electoral fee, then that could be presented on a different ledger code. But as I said, I think that is very specific to 21-22. But and if that's something that's not applicable for 22-23, we can treat this recommendation as a result. But I think that the whole point is if there is any particular transactions that's not similar to the way the system works or the way the system are recorded, that could be presented separately on the general ledger. But as far as the electoral fee is concerned, if that's the case for 22-23 not applicable, then that can be considered as a result.
Thank you. Second point, Councillor Cortell.
Add that it's applicable mainly 1 year in 4, and therefore, no, it wouldn't be applicable to 22-23 or 21-22. The second point I wanted to raise, and again, very small one, is the inability to add descriptions in the ledger, which makes it less than transparent. And I think that is a very valid point that you raised, which I would like to see sorted out by Rother IT.
I don't think that's one for Mr. Deganio, sorry, but I'm sure Duncan and Ola have registered it. And I will just say, off the top of my head, I don't know if that has changed, but I found every time I read this report and found something really interesting, I had to remind myself that this was 21-22 and not last week. I found every time I was saying, oh no, okay, forget, we've done that. So thank you. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I was interested, Chairman, in the outstanding question on page 29 about valuation of Blackfriars. Has that now been resolved? If not, when will it be resolved? The other point I couldn't find when I was going through it, but I made a note when I first went through it, so maybe I can be helped by Mr. DeGallio, and that is we were recommended to look at the annual risk register more often than we do at the moment. I made a note when I first read through and couldn't find it when I second went through, so I can't give you the page, but that seems to me something we need to discuss.
Indeed, and when you go back to the 21-22 question, I see we've more than halved the list of risks that we had on our risk register as per their recommendation. Blackfriars, is that a question for Mr. Deganio, or is that more one for Mr. Ellis?
I think it's for Mr. DeGallio, because it was they that were disputing the valuation, so has that been resolved, and if not, when will it be resolved?
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Tigania.
Yes, so the issue on the Blackfriars, it's currently being discussed with the management. We received responses from them last week, and I think our next step would be to have another conversation with them on how we can move this forward. I think this week we could probably arrange another call with your internal valuer to discuss about our challenges, because we're not 100% happy with the response. So hopefully by this week we could have something out of the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Tigania. Councillor Thomas.
Just to inform everybody here that there are ongoing discussions between representatives of the company and the finance department around this subject, and indeed those discussions are at quite an advanced stage, and I'm hoping a resolution will be reached quite quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Thank you. Councillor Langland.
Just a couple of small points. Some of the acronyms I don't understand. And I really would find it quite useful. I mean, some of them are explained and then obviously shortened, but I would find it useful this is possibly a criticism of the report, but not meant to be, but they would be quite useful to have at the bottom of the page or something, just to clarify what I'm actually reading, because there are once or twice through the report that I really don't know. And, as a member, I haven't got that financial sort of whiz that I should have to understand it. The other thing I would really like explained is on page 47, another actual issue with land values and how we seem to be not actually estimating land values very well. But I don't understand the council has not adjusted as this is below materiality. Can you explain that to me as well, please, so that I understand what that means? Because it's come up a couple of times.
I should be eager to hear your answer, Mr. Tigania, because I spent so long looking up materiality online to try and understand it, but I'm sure you can do it in a simple version.
Yeah, so the way we see materiality, the materiality is the figures we use to opine on the financial statement. So anything above, if we identified misstatements above our materiality, that needs to be corrected in the books, and if not, that would affect our qualification of our report. And now I previously mentioned that we also have this triviality threshold, which is really, really small compared to the materiality. So any adjustments or audit misstatements we identify above our triviality threshold, which happen to be one of these, 49 grand, we need to report them, but the council is not expected to adjust them. I mean, we will report them, but it's up to the council if they want to report it or not. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think from my reading of it, if there's £1 missing out of 100, that's 1%. But if it's £1 missing out of 2, that's 50%. And that would be a lot more interesting than the 1%. Was that an idiot's guide? No, he didn't hear. I think your silence is perfect, Mr. Gallagher.
Actually, what they've done is set the materiality at 2%.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you. This is to be noted. Mover? Oh, sorry.
We're going to hear somebody on value for money, I think.
Yes, that's the... I thought that was the... Hang on, perhaps it wasn't. 7, 8... Yes, Amber, sorry. I had you down for later, but
that's
yes.
me.
Thank you.
I didn't know whether you were doing the statement of accounts between 6 and 7.
I was, and I thought you're more 7, aren't you?
Yes, so I'm happy to take it now, but if you want to do the accounts first, just let me know.
We'll do this accounts first, and we'll come back to you. Thank you.
No problem.
Right, so now we move to the additional agenda item, which is the statement of accounts, and this report's going to be produced by Ola Janowitz. Ola, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. So this report is the Statement of Accounts 21-22 report, which is seeking the approval of the accounts. You may remember that on the 26th of September, we brought to the committee the draft accounts, and we discussed the different elements of the accounts. We also had training for members regarding the different elements of the statement of accounts. When it comes to the figures that were reported, they have not changed. So basically, we reported the 688,000 surplus on the provision of services. We reported net worth increase of 16 million in the value of. We reported the increase of 16 million in the net worth of the council assets. And we also reported on collection fund balances for an NDR and the council tax. The work of the accountancy team has been now largely checked by the auditors, and their work has been largely completed, just as Raymond has stated. There were some changes to the accounts, mainly to just one item on the statement of cash flows, and also some adjustments to some of the notes. What they were was there was one figure that was misstated on the statement of cash flows. And the other changes were in the note 20, which is the financial instruments note on page 68 of the statement. Also, there were some changes to note 7A, which is expenditure and income analyzed by nature on page 53. Some changes to note 19, where we added some narrative to the note on capital grants receipts in advance. And also some additional item in note 4, where we presented additional information relating to depreciation. So we presented some sensitivity analysis relating to depreciation. As Raymond has stated, we also are reviewing the valuations. So there are two valuations which are still subject to some checks, mainly the Blackfriars side. But apart from that, it's largely completed work. I just wanted to address some of the items that were mentioned in terms of the recommendations that members have asked about. One of those things was the elections costs. So the elections costs are disclosed. What auditors have stated was that they were not stated separately on a different account. So therefore they are a bit more difficult less transparent than they could be. So what I wanted to give you an update on is that we have checked it with the payroll officer, and that can be quite easily resolved. So, going forward, this will not be an issue. Have you got any questions in terms of the statement of accounts? If not...
Yeah, I'm going to give them a little bit longer. Somebody will come up with something.
Yep.
No, I don't think we have. I meant to say at the end of the last one, actually, and this one, I wanted to thank you and your team. Although obviously a lot of this report had Tony Baden behind it, and we've now got Duncan, and we look forward to him 23-24. But I'd just like to thank you and your team for all the work you do on this.
Thank you very much.
So if there's no questions on that one, this is to... Oh, there was a second part to it, wasn't there? So one is to approve those accounts, and then the second one is to actually delegate authority to the interim chief finance officer to, in consultation with me, to make changes to the statement should there be any requirement to do so following the completion of the final audit work. Sorry, Councillor Courtine.
Sorry, I was a bit late with this. The second recommendation about delegation, I wondered whether if there was a substantive material change as opposed to a trivial change, whether that could be circulated as an email around the committee on a consultative basis for us to feed our suggestions into you and to Alexandra.
Yes, thank you.
I'm really sorry, I couldn't hear it.
I do apologise. I wondered whether the second recommendation about delegating responsibility to yourself and the chair of audit could be modified slightly so that other members of the committee, if there's something major and material that needs changing, whether we could be consulted by email on it.
I think that's probably a question for me, not Ola, but I'll come to
Excellent.
Councillor Barnes.
I think I'm on the same point. I'm less worried about consulting, but I think we should be alerted if there is a significant change.
Absolutely.
And then we know, and we can raise it in other quarters if we want to.
And my question was going to be, will you delegate that to me? Because we could sit here all night deciding what is significant. Are you willing to let me decide if it's significant? I will contact you with speaking to the interim finance officer. Thank you. Well, with that proviso, we have somebody to propose accepting this report, please. Thank you. And the recommendation, yeah. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Right. Item 7, report of the External Auditor's Annual Audit Report. This does include the value for money bit that Amber's been waiting desperately to speak about. So over to you, Amber.
Thanks very much. So as noted, I'm here to present the annual auditor's report, and that does predominantly focus on our approach and findings from the value for money work. As you're probably aware, the scope of that work increased in the prior year under the updated code of practice, and that broadened the scope. That approach has remained consistent for 21-22, so therefore it's in a sort of detailed commentary format on our findings and recommendations as opposed to an opinion or a conclusion. And we focused our work on 3 key areas of arrangements for all bodies in the sector. So that's governance, financial sustainability, and improving economy, effectiveness and efficiency, or the 3 E's as we refer to it. We've reviewed a full suite of information across each of the areas. But our reporting has focused on those areas where we found changes from last year, where there was areas to follow up, or where we thought they were areas of quite significant importance. So there's a lot more information behind the report, but we've tried to keep it as succinct as possible. Overall, we determined that appropriate arrangements were in place across all 3 of those areas that our work covered. There's no significant weaknesses in arrangements that have been identified. We have raised some improvement recommendations, and they're reflective of ways that the council can demonstrate best practice, and they're not indicative of any kind of weakness in arrangements. So to make that clear, improvement recommendations are the kind of lowest grade of recommendation that could be provided under the VFM approach, and therefore represent overall robust arrangements, as we've said. The identification of improvements but no weaknesses is consistent with our findings in the prior year, so the direction of travel for the council is stable. And we note that the majority of the improvement recommendations identified in the prior year, 2021 work, have been addressed. There are some which still remain in progress. Many of them were addressed in 22-23 in many cases, because there's a bit of a time lag with other priorities and a COVID-19 environment, and that's to be expected. And the follow-up of these is included towards the end of the report. We've raised recommendations across all 3 areas of our work, and there's some key themes, but most of those are commonplace across the sector, and do reflect the challenging environment across the sector as opposed to rather specific issues in the main. And then some of those themes that we found around our recommendations. So for the financial sustainability area, we're ensuring that assumptions in the medium-term financial plan remain realistic, improving savings deliverability and exploring replenishment of reserves in the medium term. In governance, continually maximising the effectiveness of risk management processes. We do know some work has been done there, but that's kind of a continual thing around the risk register, internal audit and committee effectiveness reviews. And we've also recommended some enhancements that could be explored in budget setting and monitoring as well. In the 3Es area, recommendations centred around ways the Council could improve reporting and response to non-financial performance findings, which are identified through your own reporting, through the Local Government Association peer review, and our own high-level benchmarking as well. And 2 areas of focus of this area of the work were key partnerships, particularly with Bexhill Town Council, and the housing company, where we felt that the governance and communication arrangements, now that they're established, could be improved slightly, because they're kind of relatively in their infancy. It's more around frequency of while things are still establishing and embedding. But we do note that some of those changes have already been made in 22-23. This report focusing on 21-22. Council officers have communicated with us well throughout the process, and I'd like to thank them for that over the last few months, particularly given that this has been alongside the accounts work. And then in terms of the recommendations in the report, management have accepted those and provided additional commentary where relevant. As I say, this note does the report does specifically consider and cover 21-22, and therefore hasn't gone into too much detail in arrangements or improvements that have happened since then, although we have tried to note them where possible, and management have provided commentary where improvements have been made in 22-23 where that's relevant. So hopefully you get a full suite of information. Hopefully that's the brief overview that you need and does paint a promising picture for what has been a challenging year for the sector, and some specific areas of focus to take forwards. And I'm happy to take any questions. I'll take the rest of the detail as read.
Thank you. I'm fairly sure there'll be a question. Councillor John Barnes.
I probably am going to have a number, Chairman, but can I turn to page 66 first? Because a couple of recommendations were made there, which we were enjoined to take account of in our budget setting process, but obviously they're only available today, so we weren't able to take account of them in their budget setting process. The one that worries me and continues to worry me, and it worried me at the time of budget, is the assumptions we make around pay, which we tend on the whole, I think, to under-assume. And it's worrying that this is highlighted and underlies recommendation 1. The other one is around savings. Now, I think in some ways, through you, Chairman, the Deputy Chief Executive's approach is probably partially meeting that, but the way it's reported, we still haven't adopted, as far as I can see, the way that Grant Thornton are actually recommending that it's reported. Can I raise those two? Lorna may want to comment as well as the auditors.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Amber first and then Lorna.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully it's clear in the report, and it might be one, but I think both questions potentially better answered by officers. In In terms of the budget setting process, obviously we do accept that much of that process for 23-24 has already gone ahead, and I think the same happened last year. That's why we've made it very clear in our recommendations that were raised last year. We're aware that many of those have kind of got a year time lag because of the raising of them. What I would say is that the savings aspect of it in particular is quite commonplace across the sector. I think we're kind of raising it now so that warning is there. I think what we've tried to get across is that overall, in terms of the 21-22 performance and 22-23 to date, overall that position is looking okay, despite the fact that savings are a challenge. In terms of taking that forwards, that's probably one better for officers. In terms of the assumptions around pay, again, I think what we found was that the assumptions made were the best available information at the time. And then information kind of later came out. It's kind of now just taking that backward look and seeing if that changes the trends going forwards in the next budget setting. But I'll hand over to officers from there.
Thank you. Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as mentioned previously at this committee, we have been reviewing the Financial Stability Programme. We have done an exercise through the service planning process to identify savings which could be made in 23-24. From that programme, it also means looking back at what's been achieved through the existing programme, and in some cases taking off some of the ideas that perhaps weren't tested quite as thoroughly as we will be doing going forward, where we'll be looking at business cases coming forward. In relation to the presentation of the data, I agree. I think that's something that we can improve upon and be clear when something's a one-off saving or where it's ongoing. And just be clear of where we are in terms of the overall savings that we're trying to achieve, and more of a totaliser approach of where we are in meeting that. So we've also been looking at the support we need to actually bring this programme together. And whereas it had been managed previously by a very busy Tony Baden, we've actually put in place a new small team which will be overseeing improvement more generally and the review of council services. And they will also have oversight of the Financial Stability Programme, as well as the other programmes that the council is either currently undertaking or will be undertaking in the future. And I think putting that officer resource behind what is quite a complicated set of savings and recommendations is going to be really important. And it's really clear, and hopefully it'll be much clearer when that comes to council exactly where we are with the savings programme, where and what we're working on, and what's going forward to future years. So, yeah, I'm confident that actually the reports that come back will not only be clearer for members, the actual recommendations within them will be more robust.
Thank you. It's funny you mentioned totaliser. I was imagining this big thing outside the front of the town hall with an arrow going up.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, but not necessarily on the front of the town hall. Mr. Farmer.
I've got a couple of questions. I think they're more for Lorna, possibly, than for Grant Thornton. If I read their report right, they never say it quite so bluntly, but what I think they're saying, and I'd like Lorna to confirm that, is if the savings programme doesn't improve its delivery, it doesn't get better than the percentages it's done so far, then the medium-term financial plan means the reserves will run out. Is that a reasonable reading of that report?
Yes, I mean, that's we basically need to focus our efforts on reducing that gap, so we're not falling below our £5 million reserve limit. We do have Duncan Ellis online as well, who may want to add something there.
Maybe not.
I think that was a plea, Duncan.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Yes, I think that's a good summary of the report from Grant Thornton. I think it's really vital that we focus on delivering those savings now to plug that future gap. So we had some high-level aspirations and ideas, but it's now time to really drill down into them to make sure that we are delivering sustainable savings over the medium term. And we don't want to dip below that £5 million threshold if we can help it. So it is going to be important moving forward, and it does feed into the financial sustainability programme that Lorna's already mentioned, the service planning process. So we've got lots of ideas coming forward from officers that we're currently assessing in terms of when some of those can be delivered and what the size of those will be. I think the really interesting thing, I think, for the committee to take on board as well this evening is that actually lots of the savings and additional income that we've asked for the 24-25 financial year, which is next year's budget, actually there are a lot of those ideas that we can implement in the current financial year and next year as well, 23-24. So actually we'll start to draw in some of those savings ahead of 24-25. So I think that's a really positive message as well. Thank you, Chair.
My second question, Chair, if I may, is part of the savings is this transferring of discretionary services to the town councils. I find that difficult to understand because whether that may save money for Rother, but A, the town councils don't seem keen to take it on. There's a lot of publicity about that. And secondly, they've got to fund it. So where are they going to get the money from, apart from the community charge payers? So it seems to me it's more financial manipulation than it is actual saving.
Well, I'm not going to, as I'm on Bexhill Town Council, so would you like to?
Thank you, Chair. So our strategy around protecting discretionary services was just that. It was about protecting the provision of those services. Now, we've just talked about the fact that there's a deficit there. We can't afford to carry on providing some of those discretionary services to the level we've been providing them. Now, we do have towns and we do have our parish councils and our town councils, and this isn't new. This is something that's been going on for a very long time, the devolution of the service to the parish or town council. So they raised, you're absolutely right, they basically increased their precept to cover the costs of that service. From our point of view, that is no longer something so, for example, with the toilets, that was taken from the 23-24 revenue budget, and that line in the budget went in the case of the town council. And the town council did actually raise a precept to cover the cost of those services. We do have a delay with Bexhill Town Council regarding whether they will take on those services. It's a decision they've decided to come back to after May. But the discussions are continuing really positively with Rye Town Council and Battle Town Council. And so we're carrying on those discussions with a view to those being transferred by the 1st of April 24. So it is a very complicated picture. Some of, it's with those parishes with experience of taking on these services, there's more confidence in taking on other services. But for, I think, Bexhill Town Council, this would have been the first decision that they actually made on taking on some of the services provided by Rother. But it is very much about protecting the service and making sure that those services survive into the future. It's not unusual. It's happened all over the country for the last 15 years or so, or even longer. So, this is something that the council strategy is that if we can't devolve it, we also talk to other groups and organisations, perhaps sports clubs, for example, in the case of grounds maintenance. And then perhaps in the case of toilets, we might look at charging for them. And then, if there is no one to kind of take on these services, and after consultation with the public, we may then need to consider either closing a service or reducing it, or finding a different way to actually provide that service going forward. So it's quite a complicated picture.
It's complicated, but I just don't see where the financial savings for the area as a whole comes from, because somebody's got to pay for it if they're going to continue.
So you're right, it's still being paid for by the local residents through their council tax, whether that's a precept raised by the parish or town council, but it is a saving to us. I know that sounds awful, but it is a discretionary service that we choose to either provide or not provide, and it's a way of maintaining those services rather than seeing a reduction to services. And, you know, you have to consult, if you're going to reduce a service, that's something that you have to consult upon. And so, you know, it's about, I guess, how important that service is to protect it into the future. But yeah, it's still raised through council tax.
Thank you. Councillor John Barnes, then Councillor Cortell, then Councillor Thomas. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, perhaps I'm more familiar with the problems that are being caused by the cap on councils, which do mean you have to concentrate on what you regard as your core service. Indeed, a county, I'm no longer a county councillor, so I can speak with reasonable freedom. We identified what we thought was our core, which was statutory plus one or two things we thought were essential. We've not yet done that at Rother, but it may be somewhere where we need to go so that we can get member input into deciding what we do actually have to provide, statutory, and what we would want to provide because nobody else really can do it. I can't say, although I would love to keep the public toilets going in Bexhill at a very high standard, I have to tell you that in what was then my ward and is now my wife's ward, the public toilets have passed already some time ago to Ticehurst Parish Council, and indeed I think Burwash are taking over the toilets in Burwash, which is in my ward. So this is nothing new. What I think is important, Chairman, and I register this point again, is not to overcalculate the services. Clearly we save totally on public toilets because that's a line in our budget. But there have been services that we've provided for Bexhill, Edgerton Park, for example, which are covered to a very large extent by taxes already, which we raise. And I did an exercise once with, I think a long time ago, pre-Tony Baden. I made it at that point that transferring these services apart from the toilets would probably only save us a couple of 100,000 at most, because we're already raising special taxation to cover those. And obviously, if those are transferred to Bexhill Town Council, that special payment will go, and therefore the Town Council will have that amount of headway. But it's not the total, and we were subsidising some of those things. So when we're counting our savings, we need to be cautious in what we do about that. There is another point I want to make, but I'll let the others come in on this point first.
I know Lorna wants to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. The issue about statutory and non-statutory, that is something that we are working on, and I'm working with Duncan on, just to cost that core service and what that means. And one way that but you know, it isn't as simple as that statutory, and that's not quite often. Even with the statutory service, you do an awful lot extra around that service that costs time and money. So it is really understanding, you know, which services we have to provide and at what level we have to provide them, and whether we're best placed to provide those services. And I suppose the thing that we haven't touched on yet, but is localism, and that idea that actually a local service is best sort of managed at a very local level. So that's something that I think we need to consider. The special expenses issue, you're right, it doesn't make all of the saving, but increasingly over the years costs have gone on to those services, and it is the difference between special expenses and the actual cost of that service where the saving will be really realised. And I just wanted to make a note, that's probably enough now, but the other thing I should mention is that whilst we're capped in terms of the council tax increase, our parish and town councils aren't, so they have more freedom to raise their precept in line with what they're doing.
Thank you. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. Ultimately, we are about providing services to people, and quite rightly in our corporate plan, we've put serving the customer at the centre of everything we do. Now, protecting public toilets is, in my view, absolutely essential, and it's extremely popular. Everybody assumes they will have a toilet. Yes, what they want is to improve the toilet. They don't wish to get rid of it. I feel that at the end of the day, we need to consider the protection of key services, which may not be statutory, but are expected to be provided by local authorities at whatever level, and we would be carrying out a massive disservice to the public if we shut them down on the grounds that we need to save a very small amount of money.
Thank you, Councillor Courtell. Councillor Thomas.
The first thing I want to say is something about the housing company and the governance issue. There we've received further advice from our solicitors, Showers, at a meeting last week, and as a consequence of that, further modifications to the governance proposals will be brought forward. So just to let everybody know, we are aware of this. We are continually trying to review and improve the governance proceedings, and that is underway at the moment. Just reassurance on that point raised by the auditors. Now, the second point I want to make is about one of the recommendations that you've made, which I think is very, very important if the Council is to achieve its objectives. And that is, there is a suggestion by the auditors that what we need to do as a Council is to think a great deal more in terms of particular services. Now, if we look at, for example, the Department of Housing, Community and Neighbourhood, that has been a very successful department in terms of providing value for money. And so part of the recommendations of the auditors is that every department should monitor its expenditure much more carefully. So that's the first one. And secondly, later on in the report, there is a similar recommendation, namely that each department should actually have its own KPIs, its own benchmarking, and should be actually making sure it's achieving those targets. So that's a theme which I think is worth taking on board by the Council in order to improve its financial performance, but also its performance in terms of the quality of the services it provides for the residents. So that's the second point I want to make. The third point I want to make is that the whole business of the handling of the handover of the toilets to the Town Council was not necessarily made in a totally ideal way from the point of view of some of the town councillors. Whether we're dealing here with reasons or rationalisations, I leave you to speculate. It's not my job to do that, okay? So, two things which I think were a particular barrier from the point of view of the Town Council. The first was we offered the toilets on a leasehold basis, at a time when the government was proposing to abolish leasehold, or at least severely restrict it. And that signalled to everybody, oh, this is a bit scary, it's going to be offered on a leasehold basis, without a break clause, we're going to be lumbered, okay, and we don't want to be. And we'll lose...
Thomas, I'm not sure this is...
I think it's important. I think it's important because we're talking about how the Council can achieve savings. And it's going to achieve savings by going about things in the diplomatically right way.
Okay,
If it doesn't, yes, then it may not achieve its objectives. So it's important the Council takes account of the people it wants to take over the services. If it doesn't take account of their perspective, then they will say no again. And the savings which we need to achieve are absolutely key to achieving our financial targets. So it's really important to think about how do we do things. The second thing is we offered, I think, extremely generously, £200,000 worth of seal money to help that transfer, but the survey we did on the toilets showed they needed £365,000 worth of repairs. And so the Town Council thought to themselves, we're going to buy a pig in a poke. We don't want to be lumbered with this. If Rother don't want to be lumbered with it, why should we be? And so I think the Council has to think very, very carefully about how it approaches the Town Council in future negotiations, because otherwise those very important savings may not be achieved. So those are the main points I wanted to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've made them. Councillor Langlands and then Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. One, I think probably a couple for you, Amber, if that's okay. One, could you just explain to me, there's a whole section on follow-up of previous recommendations that you've got here on financial sustainability. And particularly, I'm on page 89 in particular, in the second point, where we haven't actually made any progress at all on a workforce plan or people strategy. And clearly, although we've been aware of it, we haven't put it and progressed it into part of the 23-24 budget. Now, looking back, at what point do you, as auditors, turn around and say, now, come on, you know, this is now 2 years down the line. When does it become a red alert, I guess, is what I'm saying? And do you pull our socks up to get on with it?
I think the thing to probably bear in mind with this, that although in time space it has been 2 years, because of the timing at which last year's report was raised, it really has only been one, because it was kind of later in the year, so there was no opportunity at all to get it into the 22-23 budget. So 23-24 is the first opportunity. So although it seems a much bigger gap than it actually is, it's not, given the timing of this work in the prior year. So I think that's probably quite important in terms of this. I think, although we deem it important, there are it is something we know that is being looked at, and therefore it will review it again next year if when we come to do this work, and at that point it'll be the 24-25 budget, I guess, and that's not there. That's probably something for us to delve into the reasons a bit deeper, but hopefully that gives you a bit of assurance.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing, please explain on page 92, issues arising from the accounts. The key issues were, I have absolutely...
Oh dear, that's a complete...
I have absolutely no idea what that means.
That should have been deleted. So apologies, that was a space saver, and that's a complete mistake on my part, so apologies for that.
Well, it would be good to have those.
Yeah, so it's because the audit findings and the annual audit report are provided alongside each other, that they would be summarised there if they were presented together, but there was no need to summarise them given that you've got the two reports together. So yeah, apologies for that typo and my space saver.
Thank you. Before I come to Councillor Barnes, I'm just going to ask Lorna to talk about the people strategy on that part that Councillor Lang has brought up.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a priority that we recognise needs to be taken forward. And the plan is to progress that alongside a new corporate plan. So it'll be something that, obviously, we're going into a new council, we'll have a new corporate plan. After May, we'll probably look to adopt that alongside the budget by February 24. And I think, what we need to deliver that plan is a people strategy. So this is something that we're looking to support. Another new team that has been established under the reshuffle is a policy team. And the policy team will be involved in working with our HR department and with service managers and heads of service across the council in pulling together the workforce strategy or people strategy. Not quite sure what we're calling it yet, but we are putting resources in place to be able to get that going.
It's really reassuring. Thank you. That's good.
Thank you, Laura. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, a couple of points. One is just to try and be a little helpful to Bexhill Town Council. When you're thinking of capital spend, it's worth bearing in mind what the actual revenue cost is in any given year. I'm not quite sure I can do the calculation off my head, but I suspect borrowing 100,000 still costs you only about 5,000 a year. And the other point to bear in mind is your repayment is a fixed sum. So inflation is, in fact, on your side. So it's worth investing over quite a long period of time. It looks expensive, but actually it's a relatively small cost on the precept. But you do have to explain it to your residents so that they fully understand the arithmetic. And you do find that you need to put a leaflet around every house so that they all know exactly what is going on. The other point I wanted to make is really, and I'm grateful to Duncan because in some sense he's preempted this. When I was looking at financial sustainability on pages 67 and 68, I have long thought that Grant Thornton, and I will allow Amber to comment on this, is a little optimistic when they talk about adequate reserves being between 5 and 10%. I have done numerous councils over the years and numerous other public bodies. Charitable trusts are enjoined to keep at least 6 months of their current expenditure. Most authorities that I have served on have tried to keep at least as a minimum between 35 and 38%. And indeed, there are only 8 authorities in the country that don't maintain a level of that. It worries me, therefore, that we are relatively low already. We shall be down by the end of this year, if everything goes to plan, to about 5.3 million. We haven't got a lot of headway. And therefore, I do think, and I think this is something Audit Committee probably needs to enjoin on the Cabinet, we really do need to do an exercise about what members value in the new council, what is core, what we have to do, what levels we should be doing, what services we should protect. Because if we don't do that exercise, we shall find ourselves making cuts that we shall come to rue.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Cortell.
Sorry, my question's probably fairly lightweight compared to Councillor Barnes. Could I ask Lorna if she could enlighten us on who is involved in the service planning programme?
So the service plans are the responsibility of our third tier officers. So that's people like heads of service and service managers. So anyone that sits on our corporate management team has to produce a service plan. The template and the kind of making sure it's all done will sit, to be quite honest, it was Joe Harrison, who's my PA, that made sure it happened this year. But the creation of the new project and programme team will be responsible for making sure that we're having the right template, we've got the right information that's coming into the service plan, because it isn't just about savings. That plan also covers the actions for that team, the key performance indicators for that service or team, risks. So all of the things that we look at a corporate level, at overview and scrutiny, and here tonight we're looking at the corporate risk register. Beneath that sits a service level risks, performance, sort of the budget of that team is in there, and the structure, and there's lots of other sections that help with the coordination of corporate work. So for example, things like our digital programme, we ask people what their digital and IT requirements are going to be for the year, and we will pull that together and give it to that team and say, so they can forward plan. The same for things like HR and procurement and all sorts of other support services. So that's the process, but it is something we want to put more attention into going forward and actually making sure they happen and we do something with the information that comes out of them.
I half expected Councillor Cortell to actually raise a question of where the members come in onto that. It may just be at the end in committees like this, but councillors get the brunt of the complaints from what the officers suggest. Councillor Barnes.
Your answer is partly in recommendation 8, which is on page 80, where they say that the budget monitoring report to Cabinet at the moment is very good at explaining what has happened and the variances, but doesn't really identify what is going to be done about them. The Cabinet have to take charge of this process and have to get involved in making sure that what is done is effective, is what we want, and actually achieves the end result. If the Cabinet don't do their job, then we need to hold them to account.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. I think that's what I meant in a roundabout way. Councillor Thomas.
I'd just like to point out some of the very good features of this report. The report is an extremely thorough one, and so it provides a kind of basis on which the Council can genuinely improve its service delivery. I'd particularly like to point out, just to emphasise certain things which Councillor Thornton has said. First of all, there's their suggestion on page 78 of the rolling schedule of committee effectiveness reviews. So this committee and all committees should regularly review how they're getting on, whether they're doing a good job or not. I think that's a very, very strong recommendation. Yeah. They also recommend that the Council should engage in scenario planning. So in other words, the Council thinks about what might happen and what it would do if those things actually materialise. So we don't find ourselves thinking, oh goodness, this has happened, and then trying to be reactive and try and do something on the spur of the moment. It should plan the scenarios in advance, so it's got its response ready if that particular scenario turns into a reality. So I think that's another very strong recommendation. It also, going back to the thing that I said before about the importance of particular areas monitoring what they're doing, this is again mentioned here, saying there's limited evidence of KPIs being monitored on the basis of individual service areas. So this seems an absolute theme of this report. Again and again, they go back to this theme of each individual area needs to be more responsible for what it does. And so this will be a very key way in which we can improve the Council's delivery of services. I think Grant Thornton needs to be applauded for the way in which they draw attention to these very useful ways in which the Council can improve its performance. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. On that point, I know it's going to be after May now, but this committee is going to be asked to report on its own effectiveness. Duncan and I have discussed that, and he's run it at previous councils and has got one ready for the members after May.
I forgot a very important point in the report, and that's that so far as our procurement strategy is concerned, there is a lack of monitoring of performance. Now, that's very, very key because it's come up in relation to Blackfriars and the Spine Road. So we do need to be thinking very much more about procurement. And there's also another recommendation here. I was quite surprised by this, that we do not have a service-level agreement with the East Sussex organisation that does our procurement. And that apparently is a problem that's been going on year after year after year, and it's never been sorted. So we need to do something to get that sorted so our relationship with the procurement hub is actually clearly set out. So that's another point. All these good recommendations in the report, and if they're followed, then we're going to do something about them. The risk is there are so many recommendations, we lose the ones that will give us the most leverage within the welter of recommendations. So we need to look at I think this might be a useful thing to do, to think what are the key recommendations that's going to give us the most leverage in terms of improving our performance. So we don't get thousands and we lose the ones that will really make a difference.
Thank you. Duncan, can I just ask you to talk about the procurement? I know you're involved in that at the moment, or trying to get it restarted, should I say?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. It is something that's been outstanding. It was something that I picked up when I started at the end of December. I've got a meeting with the head of legal services tomorrow to try and progress that. It has been drafted. There is a draft available, but the legal team are just reviewing it at the moment. So I'm hoping that can be delivered and finalised over the next couple of months. So that will remove that outstanding audit recommendation, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. And I'm just going to come back to Lorna to respond to how we're going to deal with the recommendations.
Thanks, Chair. I think one thing going forward we absolutely need to do is pull the recommendations together into one plan. And that includes the recommendations from our internal audit process as well. I've mentioned the new team we're creating, and a part of their responsibility is improvement. So it will be a matter of pulling the recommendations together and monitoring those on a regular basis, both at audit committee, but also more frequently at senior leadership team. So we really do want to focus on them. I think the good news, I think this is a really good report and really, really helpful. And I think it's really good that we've already started the journey on many of these things. So, you know, I'm sort of looking forward to getting stuck into this and actually making sure we sort of heed these recommendations and we don't have the same recommendations coming forward in the next audit.
Thank you, Lorna. Mr. Farmer.
I was just looking for clarity on this self-assessment of this committee. It says it will happen in March, which is nearly ending. When's it actually going to happen and who will be involved?
I'll come over to Duncan probably, but it will be a new committee come May. Did we actually decide to leave it, apart from anything else, the size of this agenda? But I think we decided to leave it to the new council.
I think, Chair, if I can, I've been thinking about the best way to deliver it, and I think actually it would be beneficial for the committee to do it before the election, because actually you've all been on the committee now for a period of time. If there's lots of change following the elections, we may have a set of new members who've not been on the committee at all, and to ask them to try and assess the effectiveness would be very, very difficult. So actually, in terms of gaining your feedback and setting a baseline for the future, I think that would be really, really important. But it's something I can do with the committee outside of a formal meeting, and we can review the effectiveness. And it's very much member-led in terms of how you feel the committee performs and where we can improve. And then that will provide a benchmark for future years, because the idea with these things is that we do this on an annual basis with the committee. So you design your own improvement plan, and then we monitor that each year so that we are progressing and constantly improving. So that's the idea, Chair.
Thank you, Duncan. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I welcome a little more from Duncan on how we're going to do this. I agree with him totally. It should be the outgoing committee. And some of what we discover when we talk amongst ourselves needs to feed into the training process of the new committee. So it's absolutely appropriate to do it now. But how are we going to do it? Because we haven't got another meeting. Are we going to have an informal Teams meeting or something like that?
I would think it's more likely to be an informal Teams meeting, because it wouldn't be a public meeting of the committee. It's a feedback session for us. But I suppose he might start off with a form attached to an email as to get a basic. But I know Duncan's done it before at other councils, so he will have some idea. And I've given him enough time to come up with the answer now.
Yes, it's something I will look to get out to members within the next couple of weeks. It will be informal, it will be done via Teams, and then I can report through to a later meeting just to update to say what the findings were once we've been through that. But there's effectively a questionnaire, a best practice template that the members can look at and that I will take you through, and that provides the basis on which you do your self-assessment, and like I say, it provides that benchmark for future improvement and monitoring. So that's how I'd progress it. And we'll probably have a session in early April now, mid-April, I would have thought.
Thank you. Is that a question, Mr. Farmer, or you've got your pen up? Yeah. Thank you, Duncan. You really want to ask one more? You really want to ask?
It's just a really quick question. Could that then be built into the annual audit report? Because I think that's a really positive process annually to go through with the committee. Just a suggestion.
I think going forward, it would either be part of an internal audit where we do it, or we put it on the work programme for the last meeting of every year. But yeah, thank you. There's no one else. Right, this is for recommendation that the report be noted. Can I have somebody move that, please? Thank you, Councillor Barnes.
We really need to reflect some of this last discussion in the recommendation. Yes. I leave it to you how that's drafted, but it needs to be on record.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the best way of I'll capture it from and then put it into possibly a
recommendation that we meet informally to review our experience as an audit committee and to report to the new council.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Councillor Barnes. So that's noting the report and, as Councillor Barnes just said, making arrangements to have. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Amber. And while you're there, Duncan, at the moment, I know you're not going anywhere for a bit, but it was remiss of me not to actually introduce you at the beginning of the meeting, because some of the members may not have met you and don't know who you are. They know what you are. So they can all see you on the big screen now. Do you want to say a few words, just an introduction, very briefly, please?
Thank you, Chair. On the basis that it's very brief, yes, good evening, members. My name's Duncan Ellis. I will be your interim Section 151 officer through over the next few months. I've got various experience across a number of councils in lots of different service areas, so I'm hoping to bring some of that best practice, some of the challenge and some of my previous experiences to bear in areas across the council to see where we can strengthen and improve not only governance but reporting and all sorts of things. I'm working closely with the leadership team and with Lorna, and hopefully some of my views will help improve things, and that's the idea, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Right. Agenda item 8, report of the external auditors, audit progress report and sector update. That's from page 99. And Darren Wells from Grant Thornton, about to appear on the screen. Yes, thank you. Goodbye. Over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the deliverables from the external audit, and two of those key deliverables have been the audit findings report and the value for money work, of which you've just had a very detailed discussion and challenge and review. So the rest of this report really just sets out for your information those developments that are happening in the local government sector that we think may be of interest to you. In some instances, we pose a challenge question, and where we have posed a challenge question, it's not to elicit a formal response from you. It doesn't require a formal response. It's merely there as a prompt to aid discussion should that be required. But I'm happy to pick up any questions that members may have.
Thank you. It doesn't look like there's any. Now I know where you waited to the end, Mr. Wells. So this is to note this report. Can I have a mover, please, and a seconder for that? Councillor Thomas moved and Councillor Langland seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wells, and thank you to all of the team from Grant Thornton. Right, moving on, agenda item 9, the amendment to the Constitution, delegations to officers. Lorna Ford.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is very straightforward. The committee is being asked to make a recommendation to full council on an amendment to the Constitution which relates to delegations, and well, it's if we look at paragraph 5 and it's paragraph 15.3, changes to the Constitution, and the committee is being asked to approve that all changes to the Constitution, including delegations to officers, will be approved by the Council after consideration of the proposals by Audit and Standards Committee. So the Audit and Standards Committee now taking on that role. So it's as simple as that, and the committee has been asked to approve for adoption by full Council.
Seconded by Councillor Langland. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Agenda item 10. Homes England 2022-2023 Compliance Audit Programme. Joe Powell is unable to be with us this evening, so Lorna is going to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think this is very good news. This report provides the outcome of the Homes England audit of the Next Steps accommodation programme. Members will recall that the Council was successful in its bid and was awarded nearly £400,000 of match funding to purchase several properties and provide supported accommodation to former rough sleepers. Funding was also awarded £76,000 so that residents could be supported in their own homes, and this was delivered through the East Sussex Rough Sleeping Initiative. This report just basically gives a clean bill of health to the way that those grants were spent. Grant recipients basically says that they have met the Homes England funding conditions and the contractual requirements have exercised their responsibilities set out in the Capital Funding Guide. We got a completely clean bill of health and got green status, which is excellent news.
Thank you. I don't know how many other members were looking for something in green in the report instead of the word green, but there we go. Can I have someone for noting? Can I have, thank you, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Langlands, and then all those. Oh, sorry.
I was hoping to have said something.
Oh, sorry, I didn't look your way. I'm sorry. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you. While welcome, I just feel that in the scheme of things, £400,000 seems very small. And what we've been spending several million on buying proper temporary accommodation. How much of this has been spent on rough sleepers?
This is one particular grant programme, so it's only looking, the audit was only looking at that particular aspect. In terms of the more general spend on rough sleeping and temporary accommodation, I don't have those figures in front of me. Duncan may have them in front of him, I don't know, but this report is very specific to that grant that came through for that purpose, and that's what we're looking at tonight.
Sorry if I digressed from that grant.
That's okay. I think if you want more information, I think
we can get you.
Yeah, we can get it to you. So, but thank you. So, moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Langlands. All those in favour? No. Thank you. Agenda item 11, internal audit report to 31st of December 2022. Gary Angel.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. This is the first of 4 reports I've got on this agenda. This first report is my usual quarterly report on activity within the internal audit section. It gives you current progress against the audit plan, the internal audit activity in the third quarter of 22-23, and the progress made on implementing the outstanding audit recommendations. Now, the current position, paragraph 3, basically, due to circumstances beyond our control, it's now clear that we're not being able to deliver the whole of the planned audits in 2023, the outgoing year. Consequently, 3 audits have had to be dropped from the current audit plan. However, the completion of all remaining audits should still be achievable. A summary of the audit activity to the 31st of December 2022. We've issued 5 reports in the third quarter of the year. The executive summaries are produced in Appendix A, which is page 26 onwards. The audits were homelessness prevention initiatives, community infrastructure levy, public conveniences cleaning contract, treasury management and cybersecurity. As usual, the main issues are found in each of the executive summaries in the section called level of assurance. 3 of the audits provided substantial assurance. But the other 2 only received limited assurance ratings for the reasons outlined in paragraph 7 of this report. Then there's a small section there just mentioning the request that members made at the last meeting that we should do a review of capital projects, and the Director of Place and Climate Change has confirmed this is underway. I know no more than that, that's what he's told me. Implementation of the recommendations. Progress and outstanding recommendations has been followed up, and the current position is summarised in Appendix C, which is on page 138. The old what I call the old year recommendations, that's everything other than the current year, basically. Whilst there's been some movement this quarter, there are still 8 recommendations outstanding in the old year section, 2 of which are now 4 years old. External auditors have, I said recently raised this, but it's in one of these reports that have gone up today. We should explore, the Council should explore ways to increase our responsiveness to long-standing recommendations, because obviously 4 years seems like a long time, and it is. I've therefore sent a list of all the long-standing recommendations to the senior leadership team so they can discuss progress with the officers concerned. And we'll continue to do this every 6 months until the cases are resolved. On the plus side, though, the good progress continues to be made on the current year recommendations, with 2/3 having already been implemented. Right, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Councillor Thomas.
It isn't a question, it's an observation, if that's all right, Chair. The first thing I want to say is, obviously, every time you give a report, I'm always so impressed by its clarity, the way it's set out, the way it gives us helpful information, and this is true with this one as well. It also looks so attractive. There's one page I wouldn't mind if it was turned into wallpaper, and I would then cover a wall of my house with it, because it looks that good. But I would like to take up particular problems, okay? And the first one is what I was going on about before, and that's, you know, it's Paul's point about serving the public. There are 2 things that seem to be defective. The first one is that the actual monitoring of the cleaning contract for the toilets is defective. Now, that's a thing that people care about a lot, but it's also something that would create alarm in people thinking you're taking over the toilets and make the suggestion that we're not doing a proper job, etc. And so that's an important failing of the council, not to actually have done better. Because if we want to hand over a service, we want ideally to hand it over in apple pie order. So, you know, there's a sense of something good being transferred from one council to another. And going back to an earlier point, another thing, and I missed this one, so I'm sorry not to have brought it up before, there's also a problem in terms of street cleaning. That was another very important issue from the point of view of the general public, that the public want to see street cleaning done well. They want to see the toilets kept clean. So those are 2 things which the public would expect of the council, and where we're not monitoring them as carefully as we could be. So that's really worth emphasising those. I've already mentioned the business about the procurement hub, which has come out again, and I noticed that one of the most important things that the council does, there's a tremendous number that's green in here, or orange or whatever, but financial services on page 148 is red. So what worries me here is there are certain key areas, either from the point of view of the public or from the point of view of this audit committee wanting to make sure the council is doing its very best in the areas that are the most important, where it does seem as if there's room for improvement. So I think this goes back to my earlier point. We need to establish priorities. What's going to give us the most leverage? What's going to improve the services the most in the eyes of the public? What do they care about? And also, what should be the priority for this council at a time of financial stringency? So I would very much like to see a response by the council, actually, to audits and so on, and say, we've read through these, and this is what we think we should prioritise to make the most impact in the coming years.
Lorna, then I'll come to Councillor Barnes.
I do agree it's really important to understand what's important to the public, and from Ipsos Mori studies and research that's happened, actually the things that sort of drive customer satisfaction about the whole council are those environmental factors. So it is important that we understand those priorities. We are actually doing a resident survey at the moment. We've had nearly 1,500 back now, almost, which is really, really good. It wasn't something that was open to all members of the public. It was through, it was basically those people that had contacted the council in the last 6 months. It was primarily about customer satisfaction, but we did also add some questions in about priorities. So I think it's really important that we listen to that survey when it comes back. So I just really wanted to sort of say that more generally, that is a priority. And of course, some of these areas have already been, there's already been action taken to improve them, and I think it's important to note that.
Thank you. Councillor John Barnes.
Chairman, I do find it more than disappointing that we still have these outstanding issues around IT in particular, which goes back an awfully long way, and around the procurement also goes back an awfully long way. I think we have got to have a report from the relevant officer to this committee as to why. Why the delay? Why no action? And I think that should be built into our process in future so that where there is no action reported, say after 6 months, we ask for a written report. And if no action has been taken by the end of the year, the officer should be asked to attend this committee and account for his inaction. If we don't take drastic action, this delay in meeting obligations will drift on as it has done. My second worry is around SIL. I have to say the notion that we do not take appropriate enforcement action is deeply worrying, but we don't even monitor to know whether we should. We don't charge interest. We don't actually penalise people for their failure to deliver SIL. This is a legal obligation, and I really find it outrageous that the officers concerned have not actually acted. And I really think we should be very angry as a committee and back up our internal audit officer in saying those recommendations should be actually implemented as of yesterday.
Mr. Ranger, I've got to say I do back that up. Mr. Ranger.
Can I just go back to the public conveniences audit? I just wanted to add that, just remember, it's a snapshot in time. We didn't say that the toilets weren't being adequately monitored. We just said we couldn't give you any assurance on that because had no records that were being monitored. The officers have been going out to them and so presumably doing their inspections, but there was no minutes of any management meetings with issues that raised. All the communication with the contractor was on WhatsApp, which their own boss didn't even have access to. So I believe that stopped immediately after the audit. But so I just want to say it's a snapshot in time. It was far from ideal, but the reason it got the rating it did was we couldn't give it assurance on something we couldn't see.
I'm just going to come back to Lorna to address Councillor Barnes' points.
I do think you're right. I think to have recommendations hanging around for as long as some of these have, they're probably not even relevant, and that's something that we need to, as Gary mentioned, senior leadership team is going to meet and go through them and understand the position. But keeping on top of these recommendations is something sort of I've recognised since I've been here that we need more resource going into monitoring it. And so I mentioned the new team, part of their remit is going to have oversight of these and chasing down the actions and making sure that they are done. But ultimately, I want to get to a position where culturally this is really important and they're done, and that's, it's kind of the performance management of how we operate and making sure that managers understand that these recommendations are part of their job to deliver. If you get a recommendation, then you must deliver it. So I think there's quite a lot of change there that needs to happen, but we're well on the journey to making that happen. And Gary's brilliant at never get rid of a recommendation. Always make sure it comes forward. So
it's still valid, and we have reviewed some of these long outstanding ones and removed a few that weren't so serious. But I think what we've got in there stands, and I'm to be convinced otherwise, basically.
And I think, as Councillor Barnes' point raised, there's a place for this committee in reviewing the outstanding audits every time. And whether we have an automatic, like you say, of 6 months a report and 12 months they come back, or each is on a case-by-case basis.
I think, Chairman, for the moment, until the culture changes, it ought to be automatic. as the culture responds, then I think you can drop your automatic, because at that point, hopefully it will be the exception. It is almost too much the rule at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Cortell, then Mr. Farmer. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you. I endorse what Councillor Thomas has said about how well this report has been laid out. And I think with public conveniences, the public conveniences cleaning contract, it hits the jackpot. It's quite clear from this that the contract's been properly prepared, that the budget is controlled and monitored, but the actual performance on the ground is not. And speaking as a ward councillor, where in a ward where there are several public conveniences, I can say that the standard of cleaning is very poor indeed. And the fact that there are no records dovetails with that. And I think that identifying that the performance has not been carried out is, performance monitoring hasn't been carried out, hits the jackpot. So thank you, Mr. Angle.
Mr. Farmer.
Got a couple of points, Gary, but I think it really ties up with what Councillor Barnes was saying. I didn't understand what reporting to the SLT was one thing, but there's no clarity of what the SLT would do. And so I would very much support Councillor Barnes' suggestion that there is a time-scaled reporting to this committee, because it is frustrating. The 2 years I've been with you, I've seen these things go on and nobody gives any answers, and it's not really acceptable. So I think Mr. Barnes has got the right idea. The second one, again, you mentioned, is that business of SIL. And I could not understand, Gary, why your report says quite clearly, you know, how bad it is and that money could be actually lost and not recovered. Yet you've only given medium-level recommendations. I can't understand why they're not at the highest level you can give.
We cut them a little bit slack on this one because they've had a period of change with the manager of SIL. The previous manager didn't progress these things. Then there was an absence, or I don't know how many months it was. They had no one in post, and when the new manager was put in place, he was told to prioritise getting the returns, showing how much money we've collected and for dishing out to the parishes and that. Now we've brought it to their attention. Hopefully, they're going to improve things on the enforcement side, because I totally agree with Councillor Barnes. This is a tax; it should be enforced, and we're sending out the wrong message by not doing so.
I'm still not sure I understand, Gary, why you didn't make it a high recommendation, because you've got that option, haven't you? You can have medium, low, but I know maybe you're just being sympathetic to the new manager, but I really think, as Councillor Barnes said, it's so serious that you really should make them high.
Yes, I mean, it's obviously it's more call on my part whether we do it or not. But we did give it a limited assurance, which signals all is not well and something needs to be done fairly soon. So we don't necessarily have high risk recommendations for everything. I can't remember the exact reasons why I didn't do it on this case, but I must have felt on balance. We were fairly confident they were going to act on it, so I didn't do it. So, sorry, I probably don't really answer your question, but it's not cut and dry whether something is high or not.
I'm wondering whether you will follow it up very shortly on the basis of its urgency and money being lost to the council.
Yes, I mean, it's in the audit plan for next year. We're doing a short audit solely on enforcement and to see it's been done.
Thank you. Councillor Langdons.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I think some of this has got to be placed firmly on the shoulders of the council in terms of not due diligence and probably poor delegation, in which we could have improved that a lot more over time. I am sort of a little concerned about us dropping ICT asset management this time round, because when I look at the external audit, one of the oldest recommendations is not completed is ICT governance. So I'm sort of a bit concerned about that one. I would agree that I'm concerned about the SIL and the public conveniences. The one thing I would like to ask is, in terms of our services, our core services, and our, sorry, just remind me, John, of the others, discretionary services, how do we go about reporting those discretionaries? Because it seems to me we've failed miserably there in keeping a tight hold on the record keeping of what is going on. Do we have discretionary services seem to be a little less important and therefore overlooked, I feel, quite a bit. So I'm wondering if that could be developed a bit more and we could improve how we look at all the discretionary services, record them and monitor their progress and success rate, really, certainly from a financial point of view, because at all points we lose out, really, don't we? At the moment, I'm happy with that. I've got a couple of other things, but I'll talk about those later.
Okay, thank you. I've got a feeling some of these will be coming back in 13, the audit plan. Councillor Thomas.
Very interesting in the debate we're having, and I agree with the vast majority of the contributions we've heard. But if I can just think aloud for a minute, I'm not sure whether it's the job, and please, any guidance from Lorna or anybody else on this would be appreciated. I'm not sure whether it's the job of this committee to behave like a star chamber towards individual officers, because those individual officers may be doing an excellent job across a wide range of different services, and they're under pressure, they're under heavy loads, and it may be that inevitably, if the workload is excessive, something may slip. So I think a much better way of looking at this is to regard it as the job of the chief executive, because the chief executive is responsible for the operations of the entire council. And therefore, it's the chief executive's job to make sure that each person in the organisation is doing his or her job in the best possible way. So I think that's where the responsibility should lie. I think that's where our committee needs to intervene. But I think it goes back, I know this has been a theme of mine all night, I think the council needs to think far more in terms of each individual department and each head of that department and the responsibility of the head of that department for everything that happens into it. The contribution towards the financial stability programme, the achievement of the KPIs, the actual targets of that particular part of the organisation. It looks to me as if we're looking too much, rather as a whole, and not looking at its functions, whose job it is to carry them out, whose job it is to organise them, and what the performance of each individual department is. So my take from the external audit and your audit, Gary, is that we need to actually sectionalise the way we look at the council far more, and we expect each particular department to make its contribution. Now that's thinking aloud, and I don't know what people think about that, but that's an offer.
Lorna first to respond to that, then Councillor Barnes, then Councillor Coulter.
I think it's the difference between responsibility and accountability. I think that's what we're talking about here. And you're absolutely right. We want every manager to own their areas of responsibility, whether it's finance, people management, delivering recommendations in audits. It is their responsibility to see those things through. When it comes to accountability of whether, overall the council is doing what it should be doing to the level that's agreed, then the accountability does sit with the chief executive and senior leadership team. But I think one of the sort of bits of culture change that we need to do at Rother is actually that understanding that every manager, if you've got that title, you've got a responsibility, whether it's delivering savings, or it's improving our services, improving our customer satisfaction, then we've all got a role in that. And that's something that we're sort of trying to, we've recently, well, not recently, for about the last year, we've had a managers forum. And that's been a place where we talk about the change that's coming through the council. And certainly from this meeting, I think it's important that we take up that kind of issue of being really clear about where it's a manager's responsibility. But you can't shirk the accountability, unfortunately, at the top.
Yeah, back to something you mentioned there, Councillor Langlands. I just wanted to clear up a misunderstanding there about the ICT governance and the ICT asset management. We dropped the ICT management audit because, quite simply, we didn't have enough time to do it this year because we've had long-term sickness and things, so something had to go. It's not the same as ICT governance, that's a different audit. And the ICT governance bit that the Grants Thornton were referring to was the long-standing disaster recovery plan recommendation that's been outstanding for 4 years now. So we've not dropped it because we haven't dropped it when there's a serious issue still outstanding. That gets downgraded every year, that audit, when I do the ICT governance, because that isn't in place yet. So, yeah, and it will be until it's done. So,
I find it quite scary that we haven't got a disaster recovery plan for ICT, bearing in mind we all rely on it so much. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I disagree with Councillor Thomas. We want to encourage a degree of responsibility in our managers. You can't have a single man with a span of control in Rother and expect him to be effectively responsible for everything that is going on. Formally, he's accountable. The management team needs to be collectively more accountable in some ways. But if you want to push responsibility down the hierarchy, and on the whole, the pattern of decentralised management works better than hierarchical management, then those people must take on a degree of responsibility. It's not a star chamber. If Councillor Thomas reflects on what I said, the first thing was a report after 6 months on why action hasn't been taken. It's a written report, not somebody appearing. I think you only move to be a little tougher and ask him to come personally in front of you, rather as the accounting officer does in a Whitehall department, who appears in front of the Public Accounts Committee, and then you can ask him questions. You don't start out to be a hanging judge, but you may end up actually saying, no, the explanations are not satisfactory. But I think the onus is on the manager concerned to actually explain. I want to talk about Appendix B in a moment, but it almost makes a perfect example that nobody is here to actually explain what is going on with what is one of our major problems. But I'll come back to that if you allow me in a moment.
Thank you. Councillor Courtell and Councillor Langlands.
Sorry, I've got a very traumatised eye at the moment, and I just had an eye spasm a moment ago, just as you called me.
Okay.
I'll
Do you want
try
to come
and
back
talk.
after Councillor Langlands?
I'll try and talk. Someone mentioned KPIs. I know they were in one of Gary's reports. My concern is that the KPIs have not been put together with care and intelligence. And we had the situation, I think it was overview and scrutiny, where the number in temporary accommodation, the target for temporary accommodation, was less than half of the actual for the past 3 quarters. And I am concerned that in making managers accountable, if we home in too hard on these KPIs, we could hang an innocent person.
Thank you. You okay? You okay? Yeah, no, just checking. You're okay. You want to? Okay. Councillor Langlands.
Yes, right. Yes, interesting talking about management and departments, managers and departments and of departments. Have we, Lorna, ever looked at how those departments might actually work together to make savings? Because I'm concerned that we're sort of sticking everything in silos and not actually identifying common themes across and perhaps making savings through different channels and having people in departments responsible for liaising with others, because I feel that might support progress in a completely different way. I understand what you're saying, Councillor Thomas, but I'm sort of thinking to myself, hang on, if we separate everybody out, we really then isolate each one and we don't have this great crossover that I think could benefit us.
I don't think we're suggesting that people, when it comes to an audit recommendation, that sits with the manager or head of service to get on with. When it comes to savings, there are certainly some cross-cutting areas that we're looking at, whether that's, I don't know, travel, subscriptions, all of those sorts of things. We do look across as well as just within the service. But really what we need to be doing is far more corporate working on these things. And one thing I'm keen to do, I mentioned that we are looking at service review programme and actually taking some cross-cutting issues rather than it just being about the service, but actually, you know, whether it's the way we manage our contracts or the way we commission with the community and voluntary sector. Those sorts of things, you know, involves a number of departments, but actually you need to look at it on a corporate basis to understand how you might do it differently. So I do think it's a combination of the two. But yeah, it is a good point.
Just one quick addition to that, and then I really will be quiet. Could we possibly, looking at these recommendations that are being made and talking about we need to home in on key recommendations, could that be something that perhaps is identified by yourselves, but also given to this committee so that we can review in the work programme how they are progressing? And that's something then we build in to something we're doing on a regular basis. And we can look for a report within the work programme to see how that recommendation is being progressed.
Just taking that a little further, because what was hitting me was when we talk about KPIs, is that, and changes in all the teams that Lorna's set up, that it may be that we have to look again at the dividing line between overview and scrutiny and audit standards, because I thought we were beginning to encroach on scrutiny a bit, but, and we may need to look at those. Somebody might need to look at those in the future of trying to redefine those perhaps, or make the distinction clearer between the two. I'll come to Mr. Angel before Councillor Thomas and then Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing, a word of caution I ought to make. Councillor Barnes' suggestion about reporting back after 6 months if they've not done anything, on to move recommendation forward and to explain why. Bear in mind the time lapse, and if you can see the Appendix C, I'm only reporting to the 30th of September there, so we're 6 months behind. So that's like, I do not chase recommendations until they're 6 months old, because depending on whether they're issued in the quarter, they could have been issued 4 months ago, could have been issued 5 months ago. So because of the quarterly nature of this report, 6 months are possibly 9 months would be better, because
Sorry, Councillor Thomas.
A little bit of experience of management responsibilities in secondary schools. I know how difficult it is to be a manager. Okay, it's not necessarily your fault if something doesn't go right. It can be because you didn't get the right kind of support. It could be because you weren't listened to. It may be because you raised things that are getting in the way of delivery, but for whatever reason, the things you needed to do the delivery were not made available to you. And that's why I don't think homing in on individuals is the issue. I think what we should be doing is homing in on key recommendations and targets. That's what we should be doing. And sometimes the responsibility will be across a department as well. So there isn't one individual who's clearly responsible. And it is the job, sorry, Councillor Barnes, but it is the job of the Chief Executive to keep track of what's going on within his or her system, as it were. It is that job to see what are the key things that are not being done that need to be done. And the chief responsibilities of the Chief Executive is for improvement. And so I think it is the Chief Executive who should be responsible to us. And just to finish off, we've had today, haven't we, a report on the tragedy of the head teacher who committed suicide, but under excessive pressure by Ofsted. And I don't think we want to do anything which would go even slightly towards that particular way of doing things. And I also think we can learn something from the NHS. The NHS has a non-blaming way of looking at what goes wrong. And I think that's a much better model than a model which concentrates upon blame. It's about explanation, and it's about improvement rather than blame.
Yes, Lorna.
I absolutely agree. I think that's what I said in terms of the difference between responsibility and accountability. But that thing you said about it's not a blame culture, that's critical. It's about support, and actually we're all more stretched. We're being asked to do more and more with less. Sometimes these recommendations won't be able to be done on time, but it's the explanation, isn't it? And it's about the understanding of why.
Yeah. Yes, I agreed with the last point that Councillor Thomas is making. That's the way to go about it. I think the problem, and the NHS perhaps exemplifies this to some extent, is if you don't actually hold people in junior management positions to some kind of account in a non-blame way, you will find that they play safe and actually the management becomes too hierarchical. In the health service, I have to tell you, running a PCT, I became acutely conscious of how centralised the NHS was and how bureaucratic it was as a result. It wasn't and isn't a terribly efficient organisation. And that's not the fault of the people in it who are passionately trying to do their best. What I wanted seriously to move us on to, though, is Appendix B. We not only have had major capital slippage, it was already there in our audit 2021-22, and what was pointed out there is that some of the savings, which we counted as savings, were one-off because they were the result of slippage. They're not the result of things going away. It worries me that we've put a hold on capital programs, and yet when I look at this, no review is yet undertaken, no review is yet undertaken, no review is yet undertaken, no review is yet undertaken. Nothing about when the town hall project is going to be reviewed. It's been put on hold. No funding for Ravenside, so no point in looking at that one. We've got a review, obviously, has taken place of the SIL Scheme 1, but you go down these, and frankly, the lack of progress is bewildering. Because what we're going to end up with is a third year of budgeting huge capital sums, and they will all slip. And we will not actually be delivering what they're supposed to be delivering. I really think that this is one of the major things that our last Chief Finance Officer undertook, but we really should have had some progress by now, because we're about to go into a new financial year with a major capital budget and limited progress on this review. That worries me.
Councillor Cortell.
Just an observation. Surely that's a budgetary issue, and it's a matter of putting it in the right column or the right year in terms of the medium-term financial plan, rather than budgeting for it too soon?
Yes, well, one can approach the accounting all right. That's relatively easy to resolve. What worries me is here we are, and I won't weary you on Blackfriars, but we have a housing shortage, and the housing company has to deliver. Barnhorn Road, crucial bit of property investment income, need for that service in that ward with the medical centre. Is that on hold? Why is the planning application not being in front of the committee? It seems to me here is a huge area of our budgeting on which we appear to be making no progress, and then no explanations, just nothing has been done. Nothing has been done. Nothing has been done. I'm sorry, it's just not good enough.
Lorna, and then Councillor Harmer, and then Councillor Coulter.
On some of these things, we do need to undertake some work to get to an answer of our position going forward. So, for example, on the Rother transformation and ICT investment, that's something that we've just appointed Mark Adams as our new head of digital and customer services. And one of Mark's main roles when he goes into that post will be looking at our digital programme. At the moment, we don't really have a very well-defined programme. Now, that's going to take quite a long time to get an answer to that question. So it would obviously be something that, would need investment, but quite what the scale of that investment looks like yet, we don't know. So some of those things are going to be, a proper process needs to go through to get to the end result. I don't have answers to all of the questions that you answered there, but certainly from my department, there's work that's going on to understand what the ask will be going forward, and that will take a little bit of time to put together. So the review, it is correct that the review hasn't yet been undertaken, but we do have plans for it.
Before I come on to who was next, Councillor Harmer. There are a large number of gaps here, aren't there? But I'm just thinking, they're for review by the team in charge, aren't they? They're not for review by audit. They're review from the people running that particular.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would have just thought, as part of their everyday business, even if it was one sentence, they must have a review of, how's that going? Oh, it's not going very well. Why not? And that's the kind of thing we sort of need to know. It hasn't got to be a War and Peace report.
The kind of explanation, anyway. Chairman, the kind of explanation we've just had from Lorna about the transformation enables you to understand precisely where we are and some idea of future timetable. We're told it's going to be some little time, and that's useful. It means we don't need to probe there. We may need to probe on some of the others rather harder.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether we're going to make it a recommendation of this one, but we're just discussing having an update on those at the next meeting and ask all those managers for a snapshot of where we are. Councillor Harmer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm agreeing with quite a lot of things that people are saying, but the elephant in the room is that not long after the administration took over, we've had a world pandemic and lots of disorder in every organisation, in everyone's life. So that must have had some bearing on what got done when. A massive move forward into working from home if you could, changing of buildings. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much, and just remember that we are still in a pandemic, we've still got a war, and all these things factor in our everyday life. Just saying.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Harmer. Councillor Coulter.
I don't think my point is relevant any longer.
Thank you. Just trying to roll this up my hand. So Lorna's undertaken to do that for the next meeting. I'm just wondering about adding on this one. When you first suggested the 6 months, I was sitting there writing down a version of it and then changed to 6 to 9. And I don't know if anyone would be interested in having it. If I move it, it doesn't mean to say it gets seconded. But it would add that this committee adopts a policy that where no progress has been made on a recommendation of the internal audit process within 9 months, the manager, or however we describe that, submits a report to the Audit Standards Committee to explain why, and not go on to the 12 months to get someone. Because if Gary is reporting quarterly, at the 6 month mark, that's when we can go, well, you've not had an update yet. Follow it on from there, I think. So I was Councillor Thomas.
That's the case. I would like to propose an amendment, if that's acceptable, that we ask the Chief Executive to prepare that report in consultation with the relevant officers, because it could be more than one officer. And also, I think Lorna herself said very clearly that she did not want to see a culture of blame, but a culture of explanation. And I think that's really, really important about the way we go about this. I would propose that amendment.
But nobody had seconded my motion at the moment, so you can't amend it.
Yeah, okay, that's all I'm doing.
I am happy to second, and I agree with the 9 months. I think it would be wise to put in the rider that it is an explanation. We are not asking, we're not a tribunal, but I can't agree with the notion of putting the responsibility on the Chief Executive. I just do not think that degree of control will be helpful to either the management culture or indeed actually he could give that report. Effectively what he'd be doing is signing a report produced by somebody else and then trying to answer questions on it. That won't work.
Thank you, but I'm just going to slip back into the old days of chairmanship. Is there a seconder for Councillor Thomas's amendment about making it the Chief Executive? Well, there's your answer, Councillor Thomas. But I take a point. Yeah. So we're left with, on this one, I can find me a bit of paper. No, I mess with papers everywhere. That it's resolved that the internal audit report to the 31st of December 2022 be noted, and that, as I just said, that this committee adopts a policy that where no progress has been made on a recommendation of the internal auditor, within 9 months, the manager will submit a report to the Audit and Standards Committee to explain why.
Should we be saying report or update? I mean, some of these things might be just, well, actually, just like Lorna said, in half a dozen words, this is where we are, this is what we intend to do. It seems a little bit much to be asking for a full-blown report if it's literally an update on where we are.
I'm just going to ask Councillor Mabey what she was just going to say before I cheat. I think the term would be exception report, possibly, as to why. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Corsell.
I broadly agree with Councillor Langlands. I'm not happy with the word report because it gives us the impression of 10 pages when only 2 to 5 lines is necessary. And an explanation.
take out the reports and just put submits an explanation. After 9 months, the manager submits an explanation to the Audit and Standards Committee as to the reasons. Yeah. That the committee adopts a policy that where no progress has been made on a recommendation of the internal audit process within 9 months, the manager will provide an explanation to the Audit and Standards Committee as to why. No, I don't think so.
Otherwise, I'll be answering for them again, and you probably want it direct from them.
Yeah, we want it from them. Yeah, no, we want it from the person responsible. Yeah. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Councillor Thomas. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have named you. Thank you. Does anyone need a 2-minute, 5-minute break? Or should we carry on? Well, you can go if you want. Item 12, review of internal audit 2022-23. Mr. Angel again.
Chair, I'll try and keep this one brief. This is a self-assessment of the effectiveness of the Rotherham Internal Audit Service compared to the public sector internal audit standards, which are what we're supposed to comply with to provide professional audit service. It's a 40-page checklist, which I shared with the Chair, but I didn't want to inflict that on the rest of you. Unless you want to have a copy of it, you're welcome to. I will send it to you. But I've included a summary in Appendix A, which hopefully the Chair can confirm is a fair summary of the long checklist. It's got 3 columns: Y, significance compliance with the standards; P, significance partial compliance; and N, significance no compliance. Members will note the Rotherham Internal Audit Service continues to meet the vast majority of the standards, in my opinion, it's my assessment, and no issues were found this year. The one item raised last year, which was the need to arrange for a further peer review, has already been implemented, and the outcome will be reported to the next committee. Appendix B provides an update on last year's action plan. So in conclusion, this report demonstrates Rotherham Internal Audit Service continues to operate within a high level of effectiveness.
And can I say before I come to Councillor Barnes that not only would I like to decorate my rooms with your reports, they're actually not just pretty, they're very useful and very thorough. Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I totally agree with you. We've got a highly effective internal audits. The only question I have is, it's good practice for the chair and the internal audit officer and the vice chairman to meet informally every year, totally off the record, and share things. Did that take place?
No, it didn't, and I'm going to blame it entirely on my ignorance. And if going forward various things fall into place, it will happen.
Happy to meet up whenever the chair and vice chair want to meet up. So.
Right, so that's just to.
Can we move that this committee is thoroughly satisfied with its internal audit service and congratulates those concerned?
So I can start with that, and that the review be approved. Proposed by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Cortell. Those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Agenda item 13, internal audit plan for 23-24. Mr. Angel again.
This is the internal audit plan, our work plan for the coming year. In the summary, the report details the steps I've taken to prepare the plan itself, and the resources required to deliver it. It also lists other audit areas considered but not included in the plan. The assurance map, which I keep and update each year, gives you a visual presentation of the various sources of assurance, both internal and external, received by the Council. This then is used to assist our understanding of the assurance received, to evaluate its adequacy and to highlight any potential gaps in coverage. The revised assurance map is shown in Appendix A, and the methodology I used to compile it is in Appendix B, to try and avoid any misunderstanding, assumptions and the like. In summary, several areas were highlighted this year as high and medium risk. Most of these will either be covered in the new audit plan or followed up as a result of ongoing monitoring. Because I can't fit everything in a new plan and do new work, so some has to go on the back burner a little bit. The audit plan for 2023-24 and the resources are in paragraph 15 onwards. The audit plan was compiled based on my own risk assessment carried out in February 2023. I do this every year before they produce the plan. All activities deemed high risk are automatically included in the new plan, except where they have only recently been reviewed or are already being monitored elsewhere. The rest of the plan is made up of annual governance audits and any medium risk areas that have not been reviewed recently. The audit plan is in two parts. You've got Appendix C, which is the plan itself, and Appendix E, which is how it's resourced. For transparency, I've also included a list of those areas that were not considered, that were considered but not included in the plan, and that's in Appendix D. And you can see from the comments in there why they're not gone in on this time. The new plan allows for 494 days of audit work across 21 separate audit reviews and consulting activities. As you can see, the plan does not shy away from reviewing some of the newer, more complex and, dare I say, potentially controversial areas, most of which have never been audited before. I've included these areas because of their importance to the Council's strategic objectives. However, this means that we'll have a very full programme of work this coming year, and very little wriggle room to absorb any audit overruns or any new work that may come our way. So I'm just flagging this point now, more so than I do normally, that I may need greater flexibility this year to vary the plan during the year. But if I do that, I will, of course, keep the committee informed. Having seen the plan, hopefully members will agree that it provides good audit coverage across a wide range of council activities. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Right, thank you. In that case, recommendation that it be resolved that the internal audit plan be 2023-24 be approved. Moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Madeley. All those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you. Oh, agenda item 14. Risk management update. Mr. Angel.
Yeah, my last report, you'll be pleased to hear. The main purpose of this report is to update the committee on the latest iteration of the Corporate Risk Register, which can be found in Appendix A. No new risks have been added on this occasion, and all changes to the risk scores are clearly indicated. Members will note that there are a few risks which currently exceed the Council's risk appetite, namely risk 1, 3, 12 and 13. This may either indicate further mitigation is required or simply be a reflection of factors beyond the Council's control. The risk appetite statements will need to be reviewed again in the next risk management update in September to ensure that they continue to meet the Council's requirements. Now, I'm happy to take any questions on the content of the report and to feedback any comments you may have on the Corporate Risk Register. However, if you have any specific questions on the risks or their mitigations, then these need to be directed at the office concerned. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Courtell.
Very well laid out, Gary, but I'm a little bit confused about where you've got a score where you multiply likelihood by impact, and then the aim is put at a higher figure than where we already are. Surely, if we're reaching a lower target than that, why are we saying there's some leeway?
I'll let Gary answer that.
I think you probably get hung up on the word target score there, and maybe not the best phrase.
Lower than that is a good thing.
Yeah, lower than the target score is a good thing. Yeah, basically the target score is based on the risk appetite we've agreed 6 months ago, for the type of risk, which is, you'll see the type of risk, it's in the second column, I think, yeah, the category risks, rather. So each category risk has got a maximum, each risk appetite which it is set. Now, the score in the target score thing is the maximum it should be. If it's lower than that, good, you're within your tolerance. If it's higher, we need to get the risk down. So that's what's there. So I might have confused matters by calling it target score, but that's basically, it's there to show you what we're aiming for. And it's not, I mean, when I say aiming for, it should be at least lower, that, or lower, not higher. That helps.
Yeah, just think of a better word than target. Mr. Farmer.
It's the mitigated risk.
Yeah, hang on, Mr. Farmer.
Yeah, just one question. I'm not sure. It's probably to Lorna rather than Gary, as he said he can't comment on the levels. But in view of the discussions earlier on programmes, capital programmes and projects, I can't quite understand why the risk has been reduced. It's yes, number 5.
I didn't score that risk. Ben Hook did, but I can get an explanation to the committee for his reasoning behind that.
Yeah. Councillor Barnes.
I've got a number of comments, and obviously, in the end, probably whoever is the manager of the risk programme needs to go away. And that's not Gary, it is the senior management team, and reflect on the comments of this committee. I can't help feeling the political risk has been overplayed a little, because although there might be a change of control, I can't think that any party is going to go into this election making wild and extravagant promises because they know the budgetary situation. So I can't actually see why any likely political outcome is going actually to disrupt financial stability to that extent. I would be more worried that we've underestimated risk 4, because I'm not sure the situation is fully within our control. I'm expecting inflation to come down. But I think some of the risks around 4 probably have been slightly underestimated, given that we're not likely to get any revolution in local government finance in the immediate future. And the way the budget has been set out, it's quite clear that there's very little room for manoeuvre in terms of public expenditure at central level. That may change, but not in the foreseeable future. So I'm a bit worried about 4. I am very worried about 5. I really would like to see a justification for that, because it may be the financial risks are very low, but then the performance risks are very high. And these capital schemes were not adopted simply as prestige schemes. They were meant to serve a purpose. So if you fail in delivery, they fail on purpose. If your financial aspects then look a lot better. But overall, it seems to me, and maybe the risk needs reassessing in terms of what it states, but it does seem to me too low a score and not adequately defined.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sorry. Councillor Cortell.
Just following on from my question earlier, what I couldn't understand was why on the first risk, the political risk, you had 3 times 4, which is sorry, 4 times 4, which is 16. I'm not seeing very well today. I'm trying to flick across, but my screen seems stuck. But I seem to remember from when I read this report that the target score was lower than 16. Thank you. And the same thing for 2 and 3, but further down, where the target is higher, we seem to have higher targets for some of the lower things on the list than we do for some of the higher ones. And I couldn't quite understand that.
Can I try, Chairman? Gary will probably. And I think the problem is the notion of target. I think what you're looking at is expected risk, or the risk that actually comes forward. And I think because of what I already said around 4, the dangers are such that whatever you do to mitigate, you may end up with a higher risk than the one you are estimating at the moment. Whereas hopefully on the political score, the mitigating factors, the actions already taken by the officers, mean the expected score is lower than the one which we would be worried about. The raw scores, which are in the first column, are ones without mitigation. They are the ones you estimate that you face at the moment. You put your mitigating measures in the next but one column along, and that allows you to estimate what your expected score is. But yes, on the financial front, there are so many factors not within our control. I think we shall end up in a worse place. Certainly we can't guarantee that we won't. Whereas I think on the politics, we will end up in a much better place than we might have anticipated, because we've got the right programmes in place and continuity across the divide.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. That clarifies my thinking a lot.
Thank you, but we're now going to have the correct answer. No, we're going to have Mr. Haynes.
Yeah, just to further clarify, I mean, the score and the target score, okay, we might need to call it maximum appetite or something like that. I think the name target score is a little bit misleading in this case. But it depends on the type of risk. You see the category risk in the second column. If you look at political, the second one down, and then you go along the target, you'll see it is 10. If you further down to another one that's got political on number 11, you'll see that is also 10. Because that is a maximum score you should have for that type of risk, for it to be tolerable. Similarly, if you look further down, there's two people ones there close together. You can see they are both, hopefully both the same number. Yeah, they're both 10 there. So that target score column is defined by the type of risk. And the other score, the mitigator score, is what the manager, risk owner, reckons what the current mitigated risk is.
Right. I'm going to make one suggestion not to vote on, but it's just that, because we can't go into this debate, but I'm just wondering if that, instead of target score, it's the acceptable risk that we've said we'd accept to 16, but that column should come between caused by and mitigation. So you've got, that's the acceptable risk, then the mitigations, and then that's the end risk. So it should just be, but that's just for consideration. It's not, it would then flow more, I think. But I am taking Councillor Barnes's points. I was just thinking we could, as part of this, ask the owners of 1, 4 and 5 to review their risks and the mitigations to it. Any thoughts on that? We are approving the internal audit plan, but as part of that, risk management. Corporate, that the report be noted, but that we ask the owners of risks 1, 4 and 5 to review the risks. Would that be in consultation with you, Gary? Or do they do it quite separately? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think what it's probably down a bit is whether they've just changed the risk, they've lowered them and that. There's no explanation why they've lowered it or any additional mitigations been added, so it's unclear. It's obviously what you need to speak to them about.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Probably what lies behind these different scorings are a difference in assumptions. So if you take the political risks, it's not local political risks that they're on about, it's national ones. No. And, if you could specify ones, they are government, actually. They are, yeah, look. And I think those could have changed. So these could have been written some time ago, after Liz Truss, and the following budget. And then that could have suggested, the government might impose severe cuts on local authorities. The financial situation nationally has improved a little bit. So consequently, maybe the risk has been reduced. But I think to tease out why it's changed, we need to know a little bit more about the assumptions on which the authors were working.
No. Yeah. Thank you. So if we take me as moving, accepting the report with that condition, can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Barnes. All those in favour? Thank you. Mr. Burgess, been waiting so long, so patiently. Agenda item 15, property investment strategy update. I would just, is it worth mentioning now, if we touch on, if members want to discuss what's in the confidential appendix, we will need to go into a private session. But, okay, Mr. Burgess.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This report is really just to update the committee on activity in delivering against the property investment strategy and the £35 million allocation that was set aside back in February 2018. I think it's fair to say that actually there hasn't been a great deal of activity, largely because the bulk of the remaining funds, uncommitted funds, were actually deployed through the acquisition of the Sainsbury's food store, which took place, actually completed in April last year, so not long after the previous report to this committee. And that purchase of 9.65 million basically committed the bulk of the remaining allocated sum against that £35 million allocation. There is, as I've highlighted under paragraph 13 of the report, there is a balance still remaining uncommitted, but at the moment there's nothing in the pipeline sitting waiting for further acquisitions. There's no further acquisitions in the pipeline at the present time. I think the other things perhaps worth highlighting generally in terms of the property investment strategy as a whole is that since we adopted the strategy in February 2018, things have moved on in terms of the way that the Treasury has looked at local government activity in acquiring property assets, and one thing that we were very clear embedding in the property investment strategy has been to reference and to justify the acquisition in terms of local economic benefit. We have not, as some local authorities have done, been buying up properties in Aberdeen or Birmingham or wherever. All of the acquisitions that we have made have been within district. And I think we have been very careful to make sure that we are honest in the way that we've approached assessing the acquisitions that have come our way. And I think the Sainsbury's acquisition is probably a good example of that, because whilst clearly it derives a financial benefit to the authority, in the long term we have to look at this as a potential regeneration site, and looking at the opportunities to improve on that obviously with the cooperation of Sainsbury's and in discussion with Sainsbury's, to look at what opportunities might be afforded by that site in the long term and the long-term future. I think the other thing to reference here also is the recent decision by the Council to extend the remit of the temporary accommodation programme to enable it to include commercial premises which are ancillary to residential properties that we're looking at for TA acquisitions, and that widens the field of search for Joe Powell's team in the future, and that the properties that have a commercial element will be brought before the Property Investment Panel for consideration in the same way that they would any other commercial investment. But it does enable, whilst that won't be drawn from the £35 million fund, because they're funded through Joe's budget, not Property Investment Fund budget, nevertheless the process in terms of assessing and evaluating those commercial elements of those acquisitions will take place with the Property Investment Panel as before. So that's, I think, all I've got to say on that. If there are any questions, happy to take those.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Barnes.
More of a comment, really, than a question. It would have been helpful, but I've no doubt we can find it elsewhere, to know a little bit more about the income that we're deriving from these, because that is the purpose of the 2018 programme, was instead of cutting services to actually build up income. We're actually, I think, going forward in even more need of the property investment strategy than we were. I'm not sure whether it's the business of this committee or overview and scrutiny, but clearly I welcome the two changes that have taken place. De facto, the Cabinet increased this programme from 35 to nearly 45 million by taking the Barnhorn project on board, which is a crucial regeneration project, it seems to me, but also feeds in to improving our clinical services in the town. We need new medical centres and much greater range of staff in them than GP practices. So it seems to me we ought to be recommending that the new council review the property investment strategy and give it adequate priority to avert the need to cut services. We can't decide anything as an outgoing council, but we can recommend the new council gives this adequate priority and early priority, and I think we should.
I was going to say I would hope they would, but yes, there's nothing wrong with asking them to. Anyone want to support that suggestion from Councillor Barnes? Councillor Thomas, sorry.
Is that property investment was an extremely profitable thing to do some years ago. But with the rise in interest rates having to be paid by the council, the margin between what it costs the council to borrow and what the council can make out of the property has narrowed or even become non-existent. And so I think there is sense, actually, in looking very carefully at projects in the light of the most recent financial situation. So it's not necessarily something we should recommend the council gets down to right away. Yes, it's important they should do it, but maybe before they leap into investments, we need to allow the interest rates to come down a bit. So I think we should bear that in mind.
I think the proposal was I think the proposal was to get them to review it.
But I think it's
both
important
feet into it.
But not with an implication that that's something we necessarily want to press on with if it could make the council's financial position worse. That's the important point.
I couldn't agree with Richard more about that. But one of the more interesting sides is the one that Graham Furness outlined, where you take on accommodation for housing, and you take on, if there's a commercial shop underneath, you bring that into play. That should actually be a more secure form of investment, because you create a virtuous circle. You not only are creating temporary accommodation, which is better than hotel accommodation for the people being accommodated, but you actually are paying the support for those people into your own coffers rather than those of the hoteliers. So actually that virtuous circle, I think, is one of the areas we could be looking quite profitably at. But yes, Richard's cautionary words are well taken, because the margins are going to be much slimmer, and we need, therefore, a degree of certainty that it's not going to go wrong.
Thank you. So I don't see anyone wishing to. Oh, so Cortel.
Mine's not as conceptual as the previous two speakers. Simply wanted to ask an explanation from Graham on how he perceives Sainsbury's being a potential regeneration project. I don't know if I'm breaching the grounds of confidentiality to ask that.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think we looked at that. We looked at it as a key strategic site in a town centre location. So, I mean, I'm not a planner, thankfully. But I think one has to take a long-term view with this, and we're acquiring a freehold. We're acquiring it with the benefit, obviously, of Sainsbury's as a tenant, and hopefully they will remain so for the long term. But in the context of that, we should have an eye to the future and what opportunities are offered by that site, whether that be to build above the present store, whether there be potential to expand on the car parking capacity. Those are all questions that, perhaps a bit of blue sky thinking, which needs careful appraisal and assessment and needs discussion. But I think we're looking at it as a long-term acquisition with a view to controlling the future of that location and that asset.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not getting...
I hardly dare say it, but prefabricating housing above the car park.
I'm not getting a flavour for anyone wanting to support Councillor Barnes's idea about recommending to the next council, but carry on.
A separate question. You asked if we wanted to go into closed session. I will want to go into closed session on this episode.
We shall get there very shortly then. So on this question, I say I'm not getting a flavour of anyone wishing to rush to support Councillor Barnes in that we advise the oncoming council to do their job. So I'm going to just move that this recommendation that we resolve to note this report. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Cortell, Councillor Langlands, and everyone voted for it. Right. No, well, I'll cover that when we get into it. Item 16, procurement and capital programme audits, update and management responses, a verbal update in all of 5 minutes by Duncan Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep it brief. members of the committee will be aware that we've had a couple of audits earlier this year on procurement and capital that both received limited assurance. So Tony, my predecessor, brought an update report to committee to the last meeting, and you asked for a further update at this meeting. Having discussed with the head of internal audit, all of the procurement recommendations that were raised as part of that audit have now been completed and signed off. And there's only one outstanding recommendation in terms of the capital programme, and that's the issue we've been discussing earlier this evening in terms of the review. So from my perspective, one of the things I'm implementing is a detailed review as part of the outturn process for the current financial year. So we'll bring forward an outturn report to you in June, but that will have a fundamental review of the capital programme in terms of slippage into future years and any projects that we can stop as well. And there are a number of reasons for doing that and a number of knock-on benefits. So it's no good. We talked earlier in the meeting about the amount of slippage from the capital programme, and when you're talking about tens of millions of pounds, which is what it is, that doesn't help with our cash flow forecasting and our monitoring. So if we're looking to make investment income for the council in the medium to long term, we need those cash flow forecasts to be as accurate as possible. And if we're projecting to spend tens of millions of pounds in capital that we don't then spend, it doesn't help in terms of those investment decisions we make. So getting that more accurate is really, really key. We also need to focus resources. We have a finite amount of resources and we have to deliver key priorities for the council and key outcomes. So if projects are not going to be taken forward and are not viable for a number of reasons, we need to stop those and we need to focus on the ones that can be delivered so that our resource is focused in the right place. And again, we've mentioned this several times tonight. These are exceptionally challenging times we're facing for a whole host of reasons. And the borrowing costs that we are now seeing around 4.5–5%. You only have to go back just over a year and we could borrow from the PWLB at 1.5%. So the viability of some of those business cases just is not there at the present time, because you're talking about tens of thousands and in some cases hundreds of thousands of pounds in additional borrowing costs that make marginal schemes no longer viable. So again, we need to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, and when we are making those investments, they are making the return we're expecting, or they have other outcomes. It's not always about financial return, but obviously we do have a challenging financial position, so that is one of the key focuses. I think as well, Lorna's already mentioned earlier this evening about the performance team. It's really important that that team picks up on post-project completion, even where the schemes are stopped early, because we need to learn as an organisation why we've had to abandon those schemes and what we can learn for future schemes so we don't make similar mistakes. And it's about continual improvement, which again is something we've talked about. And this may seem a strange thing for an officer to say, but I've got a mantra in terms of if you're going to fail, you should fail fast and move on. As officers, we always want to deliver for members. It's part of our job. It's ingrained in us. We want to do the best job we can. But sometimes that means we drag projects forward when really we should say, OK, this isn't working. We need to have an honest conversation and move on. And I think that's really important. And it's a cultural thing. It's not this organisation. It's every organisation I've ever worked in. We're members. We want to deliver for you. That's the end of the story. But sometimes we need to accept that we can't do all these things and we need to focus on some of the things we can deliver. And it's about learning and getting that in place. So all of those things combined will help us to have a better focus on the capital side of things. There will be an update report in June. And I think Lorna's already mentioned earlier in this meeting that we'll also provide an update to the next committee meeting in terms of where we are on those individual schemes. So hopefully that's 5-minute update, Chair. That's OK, but I'm happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Any questions? Councillor Cortell.
Will the next Treasury Management Report include the use of monies which are temporarily in our control, giving us an overnight income?
can I just hold you there a minute, Duncan? That's going to be the next agenda item, and you can answer. You can prepare the answer while we're moving on. It's because this was the procurement and capital programme. Just a quick verbal update. Then we can. That's okay. That's okay. It's a bit confusing. So this is that we note Duncan's. Oh.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just ask Duncan a question, which caused me, your remarks did give rise to some anxiety because the references were to very large capital projects. And obviously, the most obvious capital project which the council would be asked to commit to is the housing company's Blackfriars development. And what worried me was I wondered whether your remarks suggested that that is a project which could be one of the ones about which we should have an honest conversation and move on. Whereas I'm under the impression that conversations are ongoing about that project being moved on, okay? And that, there is, I think, a very sound business case for that project, which the housing company is aware of. And I'm also aware, and maybe you're not, but I'm aware of those proposals that have actually come my way in terms of the future of the housing company, which might enable it to be a substantial contributor towards council funds rather than a drain on it. So I'm just asking, was there some element of coded reference there to the housing company's Blackfriars?
I'll let Duncan answer, but I got a feeling he was talking very generally. He wasn't talking about any specific.
Very generally, but all of us are able to interpret codes.
No, yes, that's absolutely right, Chair. I was talking in generalities. I think it's important that we review, because you've got your capital programme for the future years is around 160 million. So although the housing company side of things is a big chunk of that, you've still got some very big schemes moving forward. So it's also about the timing of when we may deliver. So it's not just about having an honest conversation about what we should take forward. It's also about when it can be delivered over the future years, because again, that can impact significantly on your cash flows. And it's also about being realistic around how long some things take. So whether there is a challenge in terms of planning, for example, sometimes that can get held up. There may be a challenge around getting contractors in place because the market is very competitive at the moment and there's lots of work available. There's not necessarily the requirement to work for local authorities. So it's a whole raft of things. But no, I wasn't speaking in coded messages there. I was just really trying to outline some of the things I think we need to be looking at in terms of what a good capital programme looks like and what good programme management looks like in terms of that overall capital programme.
Thank you very much, because I think our projects do constitute a good capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to Councillor John Barnes very quickly. I'm conscious of the time, and I do think we want to talk about the Treasury Management update. But Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I'm sorry that was a verbal update, because it seems to me an awful lot of what Duncan was saying is very pertinent to some of our earlier discussions on the capital programme. And he sketched much better than I could the reasons why it really is not sensible to over-budget on your capital programme when you're going to under-deliver. And that's what's happening at the moment. But I am worried, and maybe we can come back to it in the closed session, because I think Blackfriars is a rather difficult issue for this council because of the Homes England grant. And if there really is a serious discussion, it needs to be in confidence, but we do need to have that discussion at some stage.
Yeah, thank you. I forget the standing order number. I'm going to propose we have 15 minutes extra, no more, onto this meeting to get the work done. Anyone second that? Thank you. In favour? We will get it done. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dan. What I would say, Councillor Barnes, is I hope also what Mr. Ellis was saying was quite reassuring as well to all those. Thank you. I haven't done that one, have I? Did we just recommend? Did we just resolve that one? Did we just note that one? No, sorry. Can I have resolving that report verbal update be noted, please? Thank you, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Barnes, and yeah. Item 17, Treasury Management Update. Over to you again, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pick out a couple of key issues, if I may. So this is the third quarterly update report in terms of Treasury Management, and it follows best practice as required by SIPFA. It covers the period up to the end of December last year. So Appendix A shows our updated value of investments. Although strictly speaking, it's not part of the December report, I thought it was useful to let members know that the money that we had lent to Thurrock has been returned on the date it was due back. So there is no risk outstanding in terms of that. The investment performance continues to be around the 4% mark. You'll notice the net financing costs has reduced. Again, that's reduced because of slippage in the capital programme. So when we budgeted at the start of the year, we'll have made assessments on borrowing. That borrowing requirement has slipped, so that the financing cost is lower. So that indicator is more positive because we've got lower borrowing costs and more investment income coming in. It is also due to the interest rates going up as well, which is also positive. At the risk of boring you in terms of very, very technical stuff, I think your predecessor, well, my predecessor, sorry, will have spoken to you about something called IFRS 9. So we have something called pooled funds. So our property fund, for example, is a pooled fund. And there had been proposals previously to change the way we had to report those in the accounts. And there was a risk that as the values in those funds fluctuated, that we were going to have to reflect those in the accounts. And if a fund reduced on paper, that we may have to make a provision in the accounts for it. Now, there has been an override in place for 5 years, but that's due to end in March 23, and the government were consulting on whether to extend that. The good news is that it has been extended for a further 2 years. The bad news is that we'll have to reconsult on it to see what happens after that point. My view would have been that they made a decision now and just agreed that there would be a statutory override, as there is with a number of things in local government, so it doesn't negatively impact on council taxpayers, because we're only talking about paper movements in these investments. And they will only crystallise when you actually sell one of them, and it's only at that point in time you will make a gain or a loss on that investment, and not before. Again, we talked earlier about the economic outlook. It continues to be uncertain. Councillor Barnes talked about inflation coming down this year, and that's absolutely where all the forecasts suggest it will be. They're talking about 4.5%, give or take, at the end of the year. And it looks like the interest rates will peak at around that level in the summer as well, before starting to reduce over the next 2 to 3 years. But it does put pressure, as I mentioned in the last update, in terms of borrowing costs, but it also has a beneficial and a positive impact in terms of investment returns. So we will try and make our money work as hard as we can in terms of not only overnight, but medium and longer term investments as well. So I think the key message in terms of this report is that all the indicators have been complied with. There aren't any issues or concerns for me to flag as a result of this, but I'm happy to take questions, and I can take Councillor Cortell's question initially, Chair, that he asked a little while ago, if that's helpful.
Yes, please.
But yeah, so absolutely, the overnight income, we get a cash benefit because we are the collection fund authority. We collect all the money in for the major preceptors before we pay it back out to them. So we have a benefit of collecting that. We also get lots of negatives because everyone thinks it's us that increase all the council tax, and it's obviously lots of other people that have a part of that as well. But we do get the cash benefit on a temporary basis, and we do invest that overnight. One of the things I'm introducing at the moment is a new piece of software that makes overnight investments far more efficient, and it gives us access to AAA rated funds, which are very, very secure, haven't ever failed before, and should give us returns of around 3.5%. rather than the sort of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3% we have been getting for overnight. And it means we can get our money the next day. So often you'd have to tie up money for 3 to 6 months to get those sorts of returns. It's something lots of other authorities are doing across the country. We've worked with our Treasury Management Advisors Link. I've also involved Gary in terms of the audit side of things to make sure we're comfortable with that system, but it's something I've used in a number of other places. And like I say, it improves the efficiency, the auditing, the transparency, and should generate additional returns. And we've put several £100,000 of extra income in next year's budget on the basis of improving these processes and getting returns up. So, yeah, happy to take any further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Courtauld.
Thank you, Duncan. Is the several £100,000 of extra income already in the 23-24 budget? Did we vote for that?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's already there.
Thanks.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, we'll note this report. If somebody would like to move noting it, thank you, and seconded it. That's Councillor Thomas, Councillor Barnes. All those in favour of noting this report? Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Item 18, work programme. I'm not expecting anyone to have a comment on the work programme. Noted. Thank you. Item 19, exclusion of press and public exempt information. The following item 20, includes material which is exempt from publication by virtue of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and it is recommended that the press and public be excluded. The relevant paragraph of Schedule 12A indicating the nature of the exempt information is stated after each item and is reproduced in full at the end of the agenda. In all the circumstances of each case, it is considered that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Someone like to second that proposal? Vote on it. All those in favour? Thank you. Can you stop the broadcast, please? Just before you do, we will not be coming back on after this. We will be closing the meeting, so thank you. Apparently, I've got to come back just to close it. So we will be back when we finish this meeting with this item, and it should be before 9:45. Thank you. Thank you, and that brings us to the end of tonight's Audit Standards Committee. Thank you for members and everyone else who attended. Thank you. Good night.